Hello and welcome to Blood, Guts, and Social Commentary. This is the third in our series on controversial art. We're starting at 1971 with Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs. The film was accused of glorifying rape and taking a she asked for it stance on the topic. 1971, Stanley Kubrick, A Clockwork Orange. While this film had a lot of the same issues the book did, we're just going to be talking about the film. This was considered pornographic across the US and UK. It incited riots and some copycat violence. Kubrick eventually withdrew his own film from circulation. It wasn't officially available again until after his death. Many blame this copycat violence on the film's ending differing so heavily from the book's ending. 1972, Robert Norton Peck, A Day No Pigs Would Die. This book was banned due to graphic descriptions of animal slaughter. 1972, Deep Throat. This is the only pornographic title that will be included on this list. It was banned on a few places and brought up on obscenity charges. Linda Lovelace, who starred in the film, famously became very anti-porn. She claims a gun was held to her head during shooting. She also claims that she was beaten by her husband/manager Chuck Trainer one day because she was smiling on set with the crew. Her stories about this film have undergone a lot of scrutiny and still are the center of controversy today. Unfortunately, with her passing, we may never know what really happened. 1972, Last Tango in Paris. Actors and stars of this film had to go to court in Italy on charges of obscenity. The sex scenes were considered loveless and too graphic. Recently, the director has gone on record saying what is referred to as the quote-unquote butter rape scene was in fact rape and it was not consensual at all. 1972, John Waters' Pink Flamingos. If you're eating or have just eaten and you don't know about this film, I'd highly suggest skipping this section until after your food settles. This showed scenes of bizarre sex and cannibalism. It's also infamous for its star Divine eating real dog poop. Both Waters and Divine went on record several times saying they had to get the dog to poop multiple times to get the shot they wanted. So yeah, even fake, that's kind of gross, but real, that's just, yeah. 1972, Jerry Lewis, The Day the Clown Cried. This film's controversial not only for its subject, but for the debate if it even actually exists anymore. Jerry Lewis plays a clown in Nazi Germany. He's put into a concentration camp where he ends up entertaining the children just to make them happy and try and forget the horrible things that are going on in the war. This sounds a lot like Life is Beautiful, which was nowhere near as controversial, but the big switch is at the end where Jerry Lewis's character leads the children into the showers and dies with them. As if that weren't weird enough, there are 3 separate rumors about the fate of this film, because it was never actually released. Some claim Jerry Lewis has the only copy in existence in his office and will probably destroy it. Others claim it was all destroyed and nothing exists of it anymore. There's also a third rumor that a group had stolen a copy and that they do underground showings of it. I'm not inclined to believe this one so much because they would have to do an insane amount of work to get everybody's cell phone and camera away from them, because there's no way any of the footage wouldn't have been recorded and leaked onto something by now. All anybody's certain of is Jerry Lewis gets very upset anytime this film is even mentioned. By the way, the cover I'm displaying for this film is fake. It gets passed around pretty much every April Fool's Day in collectors' communities because not only are we not sure it exists, there's no criterion of it. 1974, The Chocolate War. This book was banned due to 200 uses of profanity. It also contains depictions of violence and masturbation. 1975, The Garbage, the City, and Death. I've admittedly never seen this play, and I'm writing about it from what little reviews I could find. This play deals with fascism, terrorism, homosexuality, and homophobia. The biggest issue with it, though, is apparently it's very openly anti-Semitic. There is a character that goes unnamed and is only referred to as the quote-unquote rich Jew. There were 4 different attempts to perform this play, and all were met with protest from the Jewish community. It's apparently later been adapted into a less controversial film called My German's Terrible, not even gonna bother. I tried to locate a copy of this as well, but to no avail. 1975, A Real Young Girl. Coming-of-age stories seem to come into 2 different factions. Either you have the silly, raunchy humor like Animal House, American Pie, or they're done as a more dramatic kind of art house thing. This falls into the latter. This is about a girl who explores her sexuality in some kind of odd ways. The most heavily referenced is a scene of her rubbing a live chopped up worm into her lady garden, to put it politely. 1975, Snuff. Snuff kind of has an interesting origin story. Originally, it was a film titled The Slaughter. It was bought by a distribution company, and they thought it needed a little more to draw people in, so they staged a death of a script girl. This stage death was apparently so convincing, even though you can clearly see the seam in the hand, that they were brought up on obscenity charges and had to prove the girl actually wasn't dead. 1975, Salo. Up until maybe a few decades ago, this was considered the granddaddy of all shock films. The director wanted to make a commentary about fascism, and by doing so, make a film that was so repulsive it was completely unwatchable. Which isn't hard to do when your source material for the work comes from the Marquis de Sade. This was banned in many countries due to its brutality. There is rape, there is torture, there is a scene where apparently one of the rings in hell was very fecal in nature, and they decide to represent that with a Feast of Feces, which is possibly the worst alliteration ever. Moving on to things that were just made to shock. 1977 with the Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen. This song openly bashes the monarchy. That's kind of the only issue with it. 1977, The Clash, White Riot. This one's controversial simply because it's misunderstood. It became a white supremacy anthem when in reality the only major grievance that the Clash were trying to express is they wanted working class whites to riot for equality the same way minorities had in the past. 1978, Pretty Baby. This movie's big claim to fame is that it stars a 12-year-old Brooke Shields. There were several scenes that were cut due to accusations of child pornography where Brooke Shields was naked. There's another part where her virginity is auctioned off to the highest bidder. The overall tone of dealing with child prostitution led to a massive public outcry for this film. 1978, The Deer Hunter. This film was controversial because it depicted the Viet Cong in a historically inaccurate way, and it was deemed by most war historians to be racist. This was also one of the first movies that dealt with PTSD in Vietnam vets, and while that might not sound controversial, unfortunately PTSD wasn't really considered a real thing until very recently. Before it was something like Gulf War syndrome or shell shock, where the men were basically told that they were too weak. And that's why they broke. It had nothing to do with the hell they were put through. The reason for this line of thinking is it's kind of not hard to send people out to do terrible things, and you turn it back on them and say, well, you just couldn't handle it. There's no guilt anymore. 1979 with Caligula. This film has been called a moral holocaust, which I think is the most awesome thing to call something ever. This is mostly due to its portrayals of sex, specifically group sex. But anybody who's familiar with Caligula shouldn't be surprised by that. 1979, Walter Hill, The Warriors. This film was accused of glorifying violence and supposedly inspired some copycat crimes. This caused Paramount to temporarily pull it from print and advertising just to be on the safe side before people followed in its footsteps. If you're interested more on this time period, I'd highly suggest Rubble Kings. It's a documentary made about gangs in New York in that time period and how the Warriors kind of did and didn't play into it. That's all for this week's episode. Next week, we'll pick up at 1980 with Ozzy Osbourne's Suicide Solution. If you like what you're hearing, please hit like and subscribe. If you don't like what you're hearing or I missed something, please feel free to comment. Thank you for listening.